Welcome to Conversations with a Modern Girl, the podcast hosted by myself, Shamika Patterson, the guru of mental health and well-being. Join me as we embark on a journey of exploration and discovery, as we deepen our thoughts, as we discuss topics that affect our community. I coined myself the queen of randomly thinking, and as I'm randomly thinking and having these discussions in these podcast episodes, I invite you to join me with these thought-provoking discussions on a wide range of subjects, from lifestyle trends to the culture of the Black church, and also discussing some obstacles that we face in middle-class America, also to the intersection of mental health and well-being. Be prepared to be inspired, challenged, and empowered as we engage in meaningful conversations that aim to spark positive change and personal growth. Get ready to expand your horizons and enhance your understanding of these important issues in Conversations with a Modern Girl. People don't often talk about grief, dying, or stagnation. A lot of times we try to place that in a box, tuck it away, and not even deal with it or process it, especially not professionally. I just want to take a moment to talk about randomly grieving. Let's dive in. Are you grieving? That's something that people don't ask themselves. A lot of times we associate a feeling of illness or, a routine or the depression that you may have in association to something else. We don't just always associate that with grieving. A lot of people do not like to use the word grieving, or maybe they're just not familiar with how grief affects different individuals. When we think about grief, the first thing most of us think about is losing someone close to us, or losing a friend or a family member, a loved one. Losing a loved one and the process of grief. We think about it in that terms, but grief is lingering. Grief can be associated not just with the loss of someone, but it also could be associated with the loss of being in a certain community where you felt supported. You felt like you were getting what you needed to continue to thrive in that space, whether it was at work, whether it was in an actual community and you was working in that community and you had a support system there. You may have moved to another location and you don't have that sense of community anymore and you're having to rebuild it, and you may grieve that. You may grieve a relationship that you're currently in, and you may grieve the beginning stages of that relationship, or how things used to be, and now there's complacency there and everybody is comfortable, and you long for and you grieve the times when you were more into each other. It can be friendships. You may grieve a friendship that you lost connection with, and you wish you could go back to those times. You may grieve your youth. A lot of people grieve their youth when things are such more simple at that time, when things weren't as complex. You even have people that have lots of money that grieve the common things of a person that does not have as much money as they do, not having to worry about astronomical bills or added problems, or being in the spotlight, or being scrutinized for every move or thing that you make because you are a popular person, or because you have financial stability, in a sense that it pulls more weight on you because you're now more responsible for other things. Whereas when you weren't as financially as stable as you are now, you didn't have those obligations, and life was just more simple. Just trying to run through a couple of things that people could be grieving, And so I was asked one day, are you grieving? And I said, I think we all are. I think that we have compartmentalized our grief into different sections in our mind, and we just don't deal with it. We tuck away things. That's a defense mechanism. It's to tuck away things, to disassociate yourself with things that bring discomfort, that protects you emotionally from having to process that. So just understanding grief is not just limited to someone's passing away, but there are many types and different types of losses that don't involve death at all. estrangements, estranged relationships, financials or worldly losses, illnesses, injuries, institutional losses, just to name a few things. Can you think of other things that people grieve or that you may be grieving that you may not have even placed in the category of, maybe I am randomly grieving that thing. Maybe I'm grieving that loss, or maybe I'm grieving what I used to enjoy, or maybe I'm grieving who I used to be. Or catch this, maybe you're grieving who you desire to become, because sometimes we're grieving so much that we become stagnant. And because of that stagnation, because of that grief, we're not able to pull ourselves out of that slump, that hole, that sunken place and move forward. That's deep, We never think about it in that sense of maybe I'm grieving who I can be. When I talk to people about who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, people find it very complicated to tell me what their strengths and their weaknesses are. They have to sit and think about it. A lot of times, sometimes I get people that'll tell me things that you would basically say like in a job interview if someone asks you your strengths and weaknesses. But when you ask someone to self-explore themselves and tell me what are your strengths and weaknesses, a lot of times it's complex for people to do. They can't do it. It's complicated. What are your strengths and weaknesses? If you sat and thought right now what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are you able to do that? But what lies within your strengths and what lies within your weaknesses is a combination of who you are. And that's why I always lead with that when I'm doing therapy, this self-discovery, because we have to start there. And I talked about just a few seconds ago about sometimes being stagnated and grieving who you could be, because there are three different faces that we wear. It's who we are, who people see us, who we present to people. That's one face. Number two is who we really are, at the essence of our being, who we really are. And third is who we wish to become, who we would like to become. And sometimes somewhere we get stuck in between who we were and who we wish to become. And sometimes we are paralyzed in the state of who am I? Are you in that position? Do you know who you are, who you wish to become, what you desire to be in life? Or is this it? Is this the life that you desired? Is there more that you would like to pull from this life? Is it more opportunities? Is it ways that you would like to position yourself to grow more? Or are you okay with where you are? You have reached the highest height of what your desire has ever been to be in this life. That's something to think about. Ponder that. And as I was saying, I'm sure we all experience or have experienced some type of grief, some type of losses hit harder than others. It's complicated grief is what I said earlier. It's also known as persistent complex bereavement disorder. That's clinical. That's what we categorize complicated grief as. And in this complicated grief, of course, it's painful emotions that last so long and they're so severe that a person has trouble recovering from that loss and resuming his or her life. So that's where we go back to when I talk about being stagnant. We can experience a loss, any type of loss, and we may go through the changes of processing that loss and trying to move forward. But sometimes we just can't get over that hump. Sometimes we just can't push ourselves forward. And some of the reasons why we can't push ourselves forward is because we're stuck in this difficult stage. There are different stages of grief. Of course, it's the shock, denial, the anger, the bargaining, depression, the acceptance. But they don't always operate in that order. Some stages of grief seem a little bit more difficult to move past, but it varies. I often encounter people that struggle a lot with the bargaining stage of grief or the anger stage of grief, where they're bargaining, where they're thinking or trying to explain or figure out how things could have been done differently, or, if I would have been more involved, or they find themselves negotiating. Have you ever been in that state where something is going on and you was like, well, you know what, if I could have stepped in, or if I would have done things differently, or if they would have told me ahead of time, I could have done this, that, and the third, or, that's the bargaining I'm talking about. Being negotiations in your own thoughts as you're attempting to exchange one thing for another. Those things, negotiations with God or any other higher power, negotiating with yourself, with other people, or with fate. Wishing that things could have been different, fate or karma, thinking or categorizing it in that. It's a coping mechanism that we do when we feel helpless. It's almost like a survivor's guilt or something associated with that. Bargaining can't actually help, but it's more so like a fantasy of help. The thought of I could have changed things, the thought of I wish I could have had a better handle on things, or if I'd have known, I'd have flipped the script and done it this way. Just that sense of the fantasy of having a sense of control in your mind, the belief that you have the ability to change the past or the future. And this stage of bargaining can happen anytime. It can happen after the loss. It can happen during the loss, before the loss. It resurfaces long after death. That anger can happen before, especially if you have someone that has a terminal illness that you are watching actively die, is what we say. In the hospice world. And we say that because we know what the prognosis is, what the diagnosis is, what the end stages of life look like, and you are making preparations for that as that person is dying, that person is declining in health. And, in that stage, sometimes people have that anger beforehand. If they get a diagnosed with a terminal illness or, something happens like that, they have that anger right offhand. Why me? This is ridiculous. I've taken care of my health. I've done everything that I can to help myself, be a better person or be healthy or in any of those things, and you're angry about it. Or you could be taking care of a loved one and you have been showing up for that loved one. You have been the caregiver. You have been pouring all of yourself into this situation to help this person with the hope of things will get better. And maybe that hope of things will get better was helping you keep pushing. And then all of a sudden now they take a turn for worse. They're in the hospital for days at a time or weeks at a time, and you feel defeated. And that anger is even more persistent now than it's ever been before because you're pissed off. And you're pissed off at that hope or that thought that you felt that things will get better. Or if I do this, if I show up, if I continue to be consistent, I know that this will turn around. And it could be anger associated with anything else. Have you thought about a time? Can you think about a time where you were angry about a situation associated with grief? I can think about that. I think about it when I think about my grandmother, when I think about my uncle that passed. I think about that. I think about the anger I had associated with I wanted it to be another way. And I'm pissed that he or she is not here because I don't have them at my easy access. Or they're not here enjoying this beautiful day, this sunshine. They're not here to laugh. They're not here to watch the ball games, or they're not here to be at the family gatherings. And so anger is associated with that. So think about that. Think about those things that you may have been angry about in association with grief. I chose this subject of randomly explaining or randomly experiencing grief. Or randomly grieving is what I ended up letting the title be, in relation to not only losing my job, because I had some grief there associated with how things were on that job. I worked from home. I had been working from home for a number of years, but in this particular role, I had taken on this job. I had been working there a year from home, and I loved the flexibility of the job. I loved being at home. I loved, getting up, working in my pajamas and a top, and just getting it done, not worrying about gas or lunch or being at work in a cubicle or being at work around people and having to wear that mask. And so I love that. And I found myself here on my new job. I found myself grieving that. I found myself having a hard transition into the role of doing this new job, this new opportunity, because I long for what I used to have. Even though that job was stressful and I didn't realize it until I was gone, but I long for the freedom, the flexibility. And, I realized I was grieving that. And so sometimes you can be grieving things of that sort. So I want to do this not just about that particular subject matter, but grief as a whole, because I asked myself, how many other people really think about grief in that way? How many people think about grief associated with a loss outside of a loved one? Not many. So I also found out, that I lost a college friend. I lost a college friend recently, and I was telling my daughter about it, my family as a whole about it, but particularly I had this conversation with my daughter because she was talking about middle school. We all know how middle school is. Take your mind back to when you was in middle school, and that's the growing pains of life. I don't know many people that enjoyed middle school, but as I'm helping her navigate through this, I was explaining to her that, middle school is tough. High school gets a little better, but it does have some, hiccups along the way as you begin to evolve into who you are. But college is a place where you will find your people. College is a place where you will enjoy life. You will discover who you are, your likes, your dislikes, what you like to participate in, who are your people, who, you mesh with, click with, and you get your little clique together. And I told her that before I found out about the passing of my friend from college. So, when I discovered or heard about my friend from college that passed, it hit like a ton of bricks. It really did. Because like I said, you find your people. And then I automatically found myself grieving that carefree life that we had. I found myself grieving the simplicity of life at that time when it was just you. It was just you and your friends, and we were navigating life to the best of our abilities, and things that we thought was so important to now know and look back and know it really wasn't that serious. Here we were, these chicks running around Savannah, Georgia, growing up with each other, early adulthood. And I remember complaining about rent. And I swear, guys, my rent probably was like $425. It was like $425 a month. And, we were complaining about rent because we didn't live on campus. So we moved off campus and we each had our own little apartments, right? It's crazy how the setup was. But like two of us lived by ourselves. So I lived in my apartment by myself. My other homegirl had her own apartment. And then the one who passed, she had an apartment with like two other girls. And, we used to complain about like paying our rent and stuff. But at the same time, we was at Express and the Limited and the mall buying crap. It's hilarious. And we ate out often. But we were crying broke. It's so crazy when I look back at that. But not only little simple things like that, but, learning yourself through relationships with guys, learning yourself through working on these jobs, things of that sort. We learned how to navigate that together, how to navigate that together and come to a space of growth together. So learning about her passing was very devastating to me. And I had to, process that. And I had grief associated with it. I had some anger there, shock. I think I'm still experiencing some of that shock, but just trying to understand how to process this. And it took a while. It took some days for me to get past the initial shock of this had happened. And I had not spoken with my friend in years because fate in life took us in different directions. We were there for each other as we got married. We had our first babies. And of course, life just shifted, and it was hard to hear that because it was the unknown that I really struggled with. Have you ever been in a space like that where something happens devastating and you don't know all the pieces, and so that you get stuck right there trying to figure it out? You get stuck in that space. It's that bargaining again. You get stuck right there and you're trying to figure it out, and you're trying to see how you could have rewritten it or what you could have done to help the situation. And the guilt that's associated with it. I was stuck there. And, I went and I attended the services, and I met up with my girlfriends from, my college days. And even though it was a sad time, it also was something that poured into me in that moment, to be around those young ladies again and talk about our lives and where we are in our lives and what we've done, and then our good times and our memories. And we sat there and we grieved together. And I brought that up to say that, talking about it or having memories associated with it helped us heal in that space at that moment, acknowledging the grief. And a lot of times we don't acknowledge the grief that we have associated with so many other things, whether it was a passing that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. Whether it was the loss of a job, whether it was you're grieving that you're an empty nester now and your kids are gone and you don't have the hustle and bustle that you used to when they were there. The house is more quiet now. Whether you're grieving, that you were working and all you want to do was get to retirement, and now you're at retirement and you're kind of like, okay, what do I do now? I kind of feel like I'm stuck, or I don't have any other avenue to explore, or, the grief of a spouse that may have passed. It can be in any of those lights, grief in any of those aspects. That's what I want you to expand your mind, and I want you to think about grief in those other areas outside of the death and dying. And so I go back to how grief can paralyze you and sometimes can leave you stagnated, because grief is just not an emotion, but it can become a physical symptom. It can become a physical symptom because, for example, after learning about my friend's passing, I had this, stomach pain. And I felt this weight on my shoulders. I mean, physical, like pinching in my neck, because it was tension. This was associated with the grief that I was feeling in this situation about what had happened. And it's people that go to the doctor and they will say, it could be like not within a week of finding out about grieving something. It doesn't have to just be right when something happens. It can be months down the line, years later, and they're complaining about something and everything may check out, but they still have this back pain or this leg pain or this stomach pain, and it's associated with grief. And a lot of times these practitioners, these providers don't associate that pain with grief. And so people go about taking over-the-counter medicines or medicines that was prescribed to treat something that really is an emotion that's embedded in your body because you are hurting and you are grieving. Have you ever thought about that? I'm sure several people out there listening that have experienced that. Some people have gotten to the point where they have had to, take multiple days off work or do physical therapy it's true. It's common. That is common. And it can be associated with grief. And you may ask, well, then how do you handle that? How do you get rid of that? It's emotional, right? It's an emotional symptom that has turned into a physical symptom. And if you've been checked out at the doctor and they can't find anything, then you can pretty much chop it up and know that that's probably what it's associated with. It's my grief. How can you fix that? How can you handle that? Acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. I grew up in a super, a hyper religious type environment where they didn't want you to claim stuff. And I understand the rationale behind it. I do. You could be feeling bad. Oh, don't say that. Don't claim it. Don't claim it. Or they could say, or you could say, well, I was sick last night, and I think it was, what I'm saying, so don't claim it. Or I don't feel that good today. Don't claim it. And we say that, but that's what's going on with you. And it's nothing wrong with saying that I'm hurting or I'm grieving. And you can always put a but behind it. But I'm going to get through this. It can be, I think that I'm still just emotionally invested in the passing of my loved one. Or it may be I'll always carry this hurt inside of me, in my heart or in my spirit, because of this loss that I experienced. But I have learned how to adjust or adapt to this new way of life. Have you all been like that? Have you associated some type of pain or something that you was feeling in your body to that? Maybe I'm grieving. And you know what? Sometimes before you know it, that feeling or that pain or that discomfort goes away. Now, let me flip this. Let's go back to when I talked about how it can stagnate you and paralyze you. I say that because we can take a hit and keep ticking. And some people can take a hit and they may be stagnated for a minute, but they find themselves pulling them own selves out of this rut, right? So I say that in association with grief, we can deal with grief. We can process grief. And if you need to seek counseling, mental health services for your grief, I advise you to do so, because that is a way to help you. It's not going to get rid of grief, but it will help you be able to manage grief, and it'll help you make grief real and let it be a part of you in a healthy way. Okay? So, because some people will let things changing in their lives paralyze them from moving forward, paralyze them for being who they would desire to be and to show up as. And of course, deaths, disappointments and setbacks do upset your life. It does disrupt the order of your life. It does. But you have to learn how to adjust to a new normal. I remember this phrase, reach beyond the break and hold on. And so I try to utilize that when I'm in session with people, and I tell them, what will it take for you to reach beyond that break and hold on? What will it take for you to reach beyond whatever has crumbled your life, whatever has stagnated you, whatever has paralyzed or caused fear in your life, for you to move forward because of something that you're grieving or something that has happened? What will it take for you to reach beyond that break? Reach beyond that break in the rope, because the rope is life. Reach beyond that break in life and hold on and keep going. And some people be like, what? I just feel like everything always happens to me. Or I feel like, there's no way for me to pull myself out of this. Or you just don't understand what I'm going through. All those things are true, but true to the point of what? Is it true to the point of limiting your growth? Let's say you had a job. No, we're going to say a career, a thriving career, a lucrative career. And you have been working in that career for years. And all of a sudden, you get laid off, or you get terminated, or whatever happens, or you get sick, and you're not able to operate in that career anymore. Or let's say you had this lucrative career and you retire. And, you're not able to do those things anymore. Will you allow that to make you stop right there? You will miss out on so many other things and opportunities that your life is built for, because you'll be stagnated right there and grieving what used to be. Grieving what you felt was familiar and normal to you, because you are fearing moving on. You're fearing reaching beyond that break and moving on. You're fearing thinking about how you can pull your own self out of this situation and move forward. Now let's pump the brakes here. It does take a moment for some people, especially when it is a death of a loved one that's very close to you, something that's very significant to you. Whether it's a death of a person, whether it's a death of a relationship, it stagnates you for a moment. I'm not saying bypass that. I'm saying sit in it. I'm saying feel it. I'm saying get some help, mental health, to treatment so you can learn how to navigate it and process that healthy. And then I'm saying, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move forward. Whatever you got to do to reach beyond that break, you got to do that and keep living your life. We cannot let grief paralyze us to the point where we cannot move forward. And, I felt like that, with my friend. I was stagnant for a moment because I was in shock. I was bargaining. I was angry. I was, a lot of things, all the things I felt. And I went to the service and I sat in the church and I prayed and I was just, contemplating what happened. I don't know. I struggled with it. And as I was sitting there praying, and I asked the Lord for a sign. That's the relationship I have with the Lord. I ask him for signs. And, I just wanted to know that she was at peace and that she was okay. And the lady got up and she sung Safe in His Arms. Safe in His Arms is a song that has carried me. I remember before my grandmother passed, that song was resonating in my spirit so much and so I said, okay, I'm going to make this a part of my conference in 2018. And in my conference in 2018, I had a young lady that was close and dear to me to sing that song. And I did not know in that moment that that would be the same song that would be sung at my grandmother's funeral. Didn't know that. So whenever I hear that song, it reminds me of that. So sitting in that chapel last Friday and hearing that lady sing that song after I asked God to show me a sign, gave me confirmation that everything was okay and that she's resting in peace. Right. And so because of that, I took that thought. And so when I went into the next week, that Monday, I still was wrestling. I still was wrestling with the grief. I still was wrestling with the bargaining, right? And I prayed about it again. And I was like, I just don't know how I'm going to get this off of me. How can I get some relief or feeling the way that I'm feeling, this low place that I'm feeling, because I have a lot of questions and a lot of hurt associated with this death still. Her children, her family, I was just concerned, that was my girl. That was my girl. And the memories of our friendships and how life can just stop like that. And what came to me? It served its purpose. It served its purpose is what came to me. And in that moment, I realized that the friendship that we had for that time period in life served its purpose. Me showing up, years later, and even though I had not spoken with her, but coming and getting closure, it served its purpose. And so I say to you, whatever you may grieve, whatever complexity that you have associated with some type of a loss, whether it was any of those things that I named before, any of those things associated with grief, whether it's an estranged relationship, whether it's financial, worldly losses, illness, or injury, institutional losses, any of those things that I named or didn't name that you are grieving. And maybe you didn't even know you was grieving until you heard this podcast and realized, oh yeah, that's probably what's going on with me. I say to you, it served its purpose. It served its purpose. No matter how complex or hurtful or devastating that loss may have been, it served its purpose. And so because it served its purpose, I encourage you to reach beyond that break and hold on and keep going, because it's so much more on the other side of this devastation, of this loss. And I bet if you go and you have a conversation with people, I challenge you, go have a conversation with people about grief, not just in dying or, losing someone, but in other aspects in people's lives, and hear their stories. If you listen to some people's stories, I bet it's always a place of redemption. I bet it's always a space in there where they said they were stuck and they were stagnated and it was difficult and it was complex. And maybe whether they sought professional help or whether they sought help from the church, or whether they sought help from the internet, or, reading some stuff to try to understand what they were feeling, whatever it is that they may have done, or maybe it was another person that came along that encouraged them, or maybe it was a podcast like this that helped them reach beyond the break and hold on. I know it's a story of redemption out there. They can tell you this and that happened to me, but when I got over that, boy, let me tell you, so much other things started opening for me. So much life was after that setback that I had that I didn't know. If I'd have stayed in that spot, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have what I have now. I wouldn't enjoy my life. I wouldn't take my moments for granted if I stayed in that space. So I tell you today to reach beyond the break. We may be randomly grieving today, and you may be randomly grieving tomorrow. You could be randomly grieving next week. But I want you to understand and know whatever it is that you're randomly grieving, just know that it served its purpose. Take the good from it, reach beyond the break, and hold on. Thank you for having a conversation with me. I encourage you to please subscribe, like and subscribe, share the podcast with others. I'm trying to boost my numbers. I'll keep you updated on how that goes. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm out. Thank you to all the listeners out there. I ask you to please go to my YouTube page and like and subscribe to Conversations with the Martin Girl. Also, take the time to follow me on my social handles. Instagram is Martin Girl Movement. Facebook, same Martin Girl Movement. Thank you.